Welcome to the Canadian Business Quarterly podcast, where we speak with Canada's most influential industry leaders on the business and economic development issues taking place across the country. You can stay up to date with all of our content, including our publications, newsletters, and podcasts by visiting www.thecbq.ca and clicking on subscribe.
Today's guest is Theo van Wyk, Head of Cybersecurity and Solutions Development at CDW Canada. He is an expert in Canadian security practices with over 20 years of experience in the cybersecurity sector. He strategically guides customers to develop a balanced security approach, ensuring the recommended security solutions enable their governance, risk, and compliance program while supporting the needs of IT operations. He is also responsible for leading the team that oversees the technical go-to-market strategy and solution alignment between various expertise domains. Theo, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Jesse.
So we're going to discuss issues surrounding cybersecurity, but before we do, how about you just give us a quick overview of your organization, CDW Canada, and what the business does?
Absolutely. So CDW Canada is a national organization. We're actually a solutions provider. And what I really enjoy where we are in our evolutionary tail right now is we've really come from a product resale organization a few years ago. And many parts of the market segment still knows us as that organization. However, we've been evolving into a services and a solutions provider. And that's recently been backed by some of the awards we've been taking home as Canada's top solution provider and a few others. And so it's been a really exciting journey. And as such, as a new services organization, we're having a lot of fun in the Canadian segment and helping Canadian customers.
Okay, so today we're here to talk about some of the top threats facing companies in the digital space at the moment. Why don't you take us through what's happening in that arena?
Absolutely. So a lot of change and a lot has stayed the same. I think that's sort of par for the security industry that we've seen in the last little while. One of the top threats, however, continues to be the threat vector against our people. Right. And when we look at attackers today, really for them, it is a business. Bad actors are looking to make money. So they're also looking for efficiency on their side. And with a hybrid workforce, with some of the items we've gone through in the last couple of years, our workforce has become distributed. And so the people angle, although that's always been one of the main target areas, has really become that much more prominent. And so in the process, we've seen things such as ransomware, financial fraud, where attackers will trick users into transferring money, whaling, which is another term for where corporate executives specifically are targeted for attacks. We've really seen that increase and step up. And what's also really interesting now is as we've changed these services, so as we're getting more hybrid and distributed, organizations have adapted by making things available online, and we're moving things to the cloud. So it's fantastic for users. We're evolving how the business is operating and how we bring our services to market. But the challenge in return is that means our attack surface is changing. Things are more accessible from anywhere in the world. And unfortunately, that includes the bad actors as well. And so we've really seen bad actors go after people's credentials. And I was recently presenting with another large security organizations firm, and they actually had a really interesting saying where they said 90% of the attacks they are seeing on their cloud infrastructure is login attacks. It's just attackers that find credentials and try to log straight in. It is not the traditional old way that Hollywood sometimes like to romanticize about fancy attacking techniques. It really is the human element that attackers are looking at. And so that is, I would say, that educational piece, raising awareness, that is one of the top threats, but also one of the top opportunities for Canadian organizations.
It's my understanding these cyber attacks are continuing to increase with frequency, sophistication, and severity. So why don't you take us through the cybersecurity risk landscape, now that we're into 2022?
Absolutely. You know what? That's such a great point. The frequency and sophistication is sometimes opposing. In the sense that usually when we see something increase with sophistication, we also see the attack vector slow down. But as things are becoming more automated, and as we just covered, open to the cloud, open availability, what we've seen is the sophistication piece that comes into this is actually how the social engineering piece is being put together. And so I'll give you an example of that. What we've really noticed is, for instance, the ability for attackers to compromise, for instance, one of your trusted vendors' email accounts, and then use that to send emails. And they'll actually monitor for a little bit and find out relevant information to your account. And then they'll craft their attack in a manner that when the email is sent internally to your organization, it really looks like the person you trust. It sounds like the person you trust. Right. They're talking about things that's very relevant to you in a day-to-day scenario, right? But there's one small twist in that, and it's the sudden request like, hey, would you mind changing this account? We're having an issue with our bank. Can you just transfer the next payment to this account for us instead? So that sophistication around how it's being put together, how the attackers are doing this, has really, really stood out. And one of the interesting things, although we've seen the frequency actually increase as well on attacks, we've actually seen the number of successful breaches. When you look at attack, meaning I'm trying to get into your network, I'm trying to do something, then the actual success of those attacks have increased even more so. So attackers are really taking their time. They're crafting this, and this is where the sophistication and severity comes in. The interesting part with the severity as well is because we're building things to move faster, be distributed, you have more access than ever. For instance, we look at something like ransomware that actually makes it into a network. It can be very devastating because it can spread very effectively. Everything we're building now is very interconnected, high-speed access. And so, just the nature of that access in turns enables some of these attacks to move very quickly. And then, of course, you also have the third-party landscape. So that's the other threat vector we do see a lot, is where you have a third party or a supplier that gets compromised to get into an organization that is traditionally very secure. So if we look at things like Log4j, where people trusted that application, there's a number of security incidents like preceding that as well, where there's a pivot angle that is used to get into the organization. And so that's another element. And so what you'll see in a lot of talks today is that consideration of what should I be asking of my third-party providers? What should I be asking from people that I'm doing business with, to make sure that their security is not putting me at risk in the manner that we are operating together.
So, taking all of that on board, if we had to look at something like a top 3 best practice for building defense against these sort of cyber threats, what should we be doing as individuals and organizations?
Absolutely. So, what we've described so far, because it might actually sound a little bleak, right? It sounds complex. It sounds overwhelming. I can hear how you're thinking that as we're talking. The reality is, so what we've done is we've broken this down. Now, there's a number of security frameworks in the industry that organizations can take and apply. But the reality is, what we've been aiming at is at CDW, we've been saying it starts with your employees. It starts with us as humans, right? That is your first and your last line of defense. In that's usually where attackers find a compromise. It's also your people, if they respond fast enough and report it, that can really shrink that time that an attacker has to do something malicious before you can stop them or find out that they're in the network or something went wrong. But for people, we need to simplify it. And so we love to educate about the digital citizen. So one of the top things that you can do for defense against any attacker is what we talk about, building a digital citizen. Right. And traditional security awareness training really used to focus on the concept of here's what you need to do for the organization. Here's why it's important for the organization. But it also always put the user in a position where they thought, I need to do something for the organization, and tonight I go home and then I don't have to do this anymore. The reality is our lives are just getting more and more integrated with tech every day. You do banking on your phone or your computer. You have a lot of personal sensitive information in there. And so the idea is, let's build security aware users that can practice that at home as well. This is equally important for you in your personal life when you go through these thought processes. And we've distilled this down into sort of a 3-step process. And now this can be blown up to become very complex in some of the large security frameworks, or you can run this at home right now on your own way that you're using your device. And we call it the prepare, defend, respond. And so what we're just saying is, in the prepare phase, right, that's step 1, is think about how you're using your data and your services, right? Like, what are you actually doing on this device? And, as a user example, am I doing banking on my device? If the answer is yes, you probably want to then take steps to protect it. And we'll get to that defend in a moment. For a large organization, this can include something like a threat risk assessment, understanding where's my assets, what does my data look like, what is the typical attack surface, how would people potentially attack me? So we really try to do that and think proactively upfront. And a lot of time, this is really where it's very important as well to work with security professionals. Throughout the industry, there's a lot of passionate security professionals that wants to help train people to think correctly. Because once we have that in place, then the defend piece comes naturally, and that's how I protect myself. This is now typically where we can get into things like process and technology and how I deploy that. So on my phone, for instance, you're doing banking on your phone. One of the defense steps right away would be turn on the security code, your security code or Face ID or some kind of access on your phone that if I pick up your phone, I cannot just go in and get your banking. Another layer then is, this is really sensitive. Turn on multi-factor authentication or like turn on another way to make sure that even if I do get into your phone, I can't just get straight into your banking. And now you start layering that security, but you're starting because you've thought it through on how you're using it. That clicks into that defense. And then the very important part is that response piece, right? That's sort of the third step. And that's like, if things go wrong, what do I do? If I suddenly see a weird transaction, if I accidentally click on a link from a corporate perspective, do I know who I call and let know at the operations center? Do I know what the emergency number at my bank is to let them know I'm seeing suspicious activity? And then in larger organization from that perspective, so do I have an incident response plan? Do I have something that I can accurately execute on that is can tell my teams within my organization how to contain the attack and kind of come back to a trusted state?
So, I mean, that's quite a lot to take in. In
Right.
lieu of that, how can organizations then create, a culture and identity where they're utilizing best practice for security?
So one of the big things, and you sort of attack that problem from both sides. So you definitely want to get security ingrained with your users. We talked about the digital citizen, where people are just thinking about the awareness. But what you definitely then want to do from the other side is get that message trickling from the top down. And so one of the stats that we saw when we worked was how much more secure and the significant difference it made in security posture in organizations where the respondents reported that their C-suite or their all the way from the board, security is being mandated, but it's also being talked at that level. So you want to hear your leaders in your organization speak security, show the importance, show that they're practicing it as well. And that's really the crux of it. If we get the people to talk and raise awareness of it. And the other thing though is, again, we talk a lot about making security right-sized, right? As you heard, like we can, even in the conversation today, we've varied between relatively simple examples on your phone for banking to very complex security scenarios in large organizations. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done there to make it relevant. Like answer the why, understand how your organization is operating and what's important. Because what we found is users and humans in general, we buy into something when I'm not just told what to do, but I can grasp the reason and I can see how my actions contribute to it. So once we articulate that, but then make sure that the leaders are also living and showing this so that users and corporate employees are seeing this, and then in turn enable those employees and train them so that they feel comfortable following the same path.
So then, if we're actually talking about the companies, doing and implementing this, how do they create this sort of response and recovery plan?
So there's a number of frameworks online that organizations can tackle and use, but the reality is this is an item where bringing in an expert that has done this before can really help you ask the right questions, right? Helps you ask smarter questions.
Sure.
So it really is an exercise. The very important thing that we do stress here as well, and you would have heard me say this before, is just that concept of right-sized. The biggest concern that we see here is if somebody goes out and just grabs a standard framework or grab a standard response plan, it's very complex and they can become overwhelmed very quickly. And in many cases, it is more complex than what they need. So we go back to that prepare, defend, respond, right? Work with an organization, think through that prepare phase. So understand, where is your data? How are my users accessing my data? How are they using my services? And sort of where would I be vulnerable to an attacker? What would really hurt or damage the organization if that were to happen to us? And once you understand that, then we look at it, then you can start taking these response plans and customizing it for yourself. so that it's really applicable. The other really important thing that you have to consider here is if it's overly complex, it goes into the drawer and it gets covered with dust and nobody touches it again.
Sure.
Right? It has to be actionable. That's why it has to be right sized and relevant. It has to be updated because your organization changes as it's going. So, maybe an annual check-in, or if there's a big event such as a merger, or you're buying a new organization, or you've made significant changes to your network, update that and then practice it. When we look at the study, we embedded a number of data points that we tracked throughout the study to correlate how mature your organization actually is in the security landscape, so we can calculate that. And what we noticed is organizations that reported that they regularly test their actual incident response plans and their recovery plans also scored on the other points in a manner that placed them in the highly mature phase. So, it's one of those things, just by practicing this and doing this, you're going to create, the comfort with your users. You're going to embed that security awareness in that thinking manner. And that in turn is going to up your security maturity so that the organization is more comfortable recovering from a potential incident.
So, what would be some of the key considerations for security awareness training, and how often would this need to be done?
So one of the biggest mistakes I see organizations make is what we call the blame and shame game, right? And you've had that, like you would have seen that before, where you get that email, you click on the link, and immediately you're being trained again because it said you clicked on something you should not have done, right? And we've all had that, and we've all had that moment where you feel, I can't believe I did this. So when that happens, your users are in an emotionally a very sensitive state, right, potentially. And so what we've really been emphasizing is that building a healthy, like a safe space for security awareness training, and that you have to educate from that spot. So we do a lot around gamification, where what we mean by that is, for instance, there's a lot of solutions out there that will allow you to do security training for different teams and then put the scores together, and you get scored on how well you did. Did you respond fast enough to the attack? What was your actions after you accidentally clicked on the link? And it becomes like a competition, a friendly competition within the org to say, my team is at a 98, mine's at a 85. How is your team scoring? But what I really like about that, sort of that making it fun and talking about security and being aware of it, is that 1-2 combo is so important, that if you do click something wrong, you need to have not just the comfort, but almost feel compelled. You must be excited about being able to go report that right away and realizing what a big difference you are making to your organization's security, because you're going in and you're reporting this and you're getting this to the right people. With that being said, in that moment of panic, when you look at that security awareness training, it has to be ingrained. Like, obviously, don't do these things, but if you do, that next step on, this is the number you call, this is the email, this is the person you reach out to, that has to be ingrained to the point where it is so natural that it should be easy for the employee or for the user to just automatically do that and know they should be doing that and feel it's a safe space. In terms of frequency, just like all things, you can overtrain. So in the study, we did track a data point to match that to maturity. And the interesting thing we found is quarterly was really sort of that magical spot. It's a frequent enough that it refreshes in your brain. You remember what's going on. Definitely no training is the worst, right?
Yeah.
That's definitely not what you want to do. But we also talked to some organizations that said they were training monthly, and the return on delivery was minimal for monthly training versus quarterly. So there's definitely a saturation level where you can overtrain your user community.
And so we're starting to wrap up then. As we get to that point, what would be the top technologies organizations should be leveraging then to understand and advance their security?
So when we look at the technology side, so we always emphasize people, process, and technology, but we've talked a lot about people, and we're going to remove process here for a moment. The biggest secret for us is that we're seeing more organizations actually do security in the cloud. And what I mean by that is, cloud used to be something where you would take your data or your services, right? And then it became a place where you would go secure things, or maybe there's very cloud specific tools, security tools, and that's still fine. But security was based on trust, and where we were, it used to be run on premise. Like, organizations would sort of hold their arms very close around that. And what we're seeing in the latest survey is organizations are actually now leveraging the cloud to run their security operations and processes and out of the cloud. And I think this is really key, because it allows you to scale and move with your environment. It's very difficult to secure your dynamic cloud environment with a traditional security network tool, right? So you have to map those abilities. And then at the end of the day, as we're looking more at users accessing data, we really emphasize the identity part, right? Can I accurately give you credentials, because it's such a large portion of the attack vector? So when you really look at that technologies, I'd say use technologies that matches how your business operates, but then within sort of a little buckets within that, definitely focus on your user authentication. Make sure you have multi-factor, make sure you have an actual user base, so that everybody's not just using the admin account, right? Because if that gets compromised, then everything is at risk. So create that user system. Secure your endpoint is obviously the very, very next big one that we talk about, with users moving around, being hybrid, remote. That endpoint is the new attack surface. And then really, so the last part is cloud security, but it's really access security. And a lot of those security measures are still traditional. We're used to those. They've changed in flavor a little bit, and this is where you can work with security services provider to help you understand some of these new technologies. But it's going to be, how do I protect that surface on the data or the service itself? So if an attacker comes at your system and they obviously don't have an ID, or they don't have a trusted corporate device, what is that service presentation going to look like to them, and how do I protect that? And that can include things like, you'll hear the term SASE, Secure Access Services Edge, right? And that's just really a cloud-based firewall and cloud-based security tool set that is put there to help protect these services from attackers. So I'd say protect your user, protect the device they're moving around with, and that's using to come into the organization, and then just think about that attack. So like when they land, how do I protect those services?
So Theo, we're at the end of our chat today. Before we finish up, is there anything else you might like to add?
One of the things that we will be launching soon, and if you look at if you go to our website, there will be a banner at the top that will link you to the security study. You can also go to cdw.ca/security. One of the things out of there that we're going to be launching for Canadian organizations to test themselves against is a shortened version of the questionnaire, where you can answer some anonymous answers for yourself, and it'll generate a little bit of a report that you can see how you score on some of these key metrics. I think it's really important for us in this report. One of the main drivers for the market is to show Canadian organizations that we're all facing the same attacks, we're facing the same threats, we're battling the same battles, and therefore it's really interesting and important to see how your counterparts are doing, and potentially open for discussion with hopefully some of your counterparts. We all have to work together to secure these services. And if you need help, that is where an organization like CDW with our security professionals will be more than happy to engage. We love to talk this. We're really passionate, as you can hear.
Yes.
We're very passionate about the topic. So anything we can do to help, you can reach out. There's also a number of other great security providers. The number one thing for us out of this is let's make our organization secure so that we can keep operating and serve our customers.
Excellent. Well, Theo, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Jesse.
This has been a production of the Canadian Business Quarterly, a division of Romulus Rising Proprietary Limited. All rights reserved. You can stay up to date with the Canadian Business Quarterly, including our publications, newsletters, and podcasts by visiting www.thecbq.ca and clicking on subscribe.